It is now my honor to introduce our next speaker, Eddy Cartaya. Eddy started caving and joined the NSS in 1987 while a cadet at West Point, New York. He graduated in 1990 with a degree in aerospace engineering. His first NCRC course was in 1995 at Bristol, Virginia, and he has been involved with cave rescue and mountain rescue ever since. He has spent 10 years as a National Park Service Protection Ranger. He's been a SPAR coordinator at the Blue Ridge Parkway, an instructor coordinator for the NPS Basic Technical Rescue Training Academy. Currently, he is a rescue leader for Portland Mountain Rescue and a leader of the Cave Rescue subsection. He has previously spent 9 years over the Deschutes County Oregon Cave Rescue section. His day job is with the U.S. Forest Service as a law enforcement officer, EMT, certified arborist tree climber, cave rescue manager, and rope technician for the Region 6 tactical team with responsibility in vertical protester interventions. He's a current NCRC instructor and certified SPAR lead. He's been the Pacific Northwest Regional Coordinator for the last 7 years and is a delegate to the International Commission of Alpine Rescue and the European Cave Rescue Association. He's also a project coordinator for the Glacier Cave Explorers section of the Oregon High Desert Grotto, managing the Glacier Cave studies on Mount Hood, Mount St. Helens, and Mt Rainier since 2012. Please help me welcome Eddy.
Thanks, Gretchen, and great job, Carrie, on your patient packaging thing. We'll actually have a couple slides here that piggyback on what you covered. So yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about, I was asked to talk about the Glacier Cave, funeral rescue considerations for rescue pre-planning and whatnot. It's kind of a unique situation. A lot of you, most of you, I would suspect, probably 95% of you don't have glacier caves in your area. So you're probably wondering, what's the relevancy of this? But there is a lot of crossover relevancy, in terms of like this very remote caving or pre-planning when you have to get really lightweight and solve problems. We all know about what SPAR, small party assisted rescue is, but maybe possible expansions of the thinking in terms of maybe integrating small lightweight litters into your situation there, or if you're responding by way of aircraft, where anything where weight, every ounce counts, such as helicopter response for these sorts of things, which is not uncommon. If you're an NCRC trained rescuer, you may be called. There's a long multi-operational period situation called to help out with this. It gives you a little bit of an idea of what to look for. And along those lines, it's expanding your risk assessment viewing lens. As you're going to see in this presentation, there's a lot of hazards that are not readily apparent that just kind of exist when you finally start doing 360, global analysis of your surroundings and see what's there, what could kill you from overhead or falls down in front of you and then rolls down into you and whatnot. So lots of things in that regard. And also the hazmat, a lot of us don't deal with bad air or bad air environments, but that's pretty common up here. Not just in glaciers, but just in anywhere that has volcanic history. There's a chance for those sorts of things to take place. And again, just to give you some orientation to that. So ask questions as you can. I'm going to start here with hopefully it works. Let's see if it works. This is a video, a little compilation made by Brent McGregor, the former chairman of Oregon High Desert Grotto, on the Mount Hood Glacier Cave project. So hopefully the music, it's just to music here. I'll go ahead and try and play it. All right. So yeah, many thanks to Brent McGregor. He's a phenomenal videographer and photographer. Spent a lot of hours, broke a lot of cameras making that stuff. So it's a costly sport. So yeah, we'll talk about the Glacier Cave studies and the Pacific Northwest volcanoes. The three that this list will encompass is Mount Hood, Mt Rainier, and Mount St. Helens. A couple of those are in wilderness areas. Mount St. Helens is not, but the crater's closed to the public. That does not stop them from going there, as you can imagine. So they're really one of the primary objectives of these studies and just technique development is to establish rescue pre-plans for these systems, because they're just not conventional. It requires not just good caving rescue skills, but mountaineer skills just to get people there. And there's a lot of anomalies that come out of this. So we'll talk a little bit about it, and feel free to ask questions as we go. This has been a very successful joint venture between the National Cave Rescue Commission and the Mountain Rescue Association for each of these glacier cave systems. Because again, it kind of hybridizes both mountain rescue and cave rescue. And it's a huge team event. You can't do this by yourself. It's getting the gear up there. Most places you can't have a helicopter. We're lucky in St. Helens that we can, but the rest, you got to hump that stuff up. Some of these expeditions take 100 people, 2 weeks to move things up in and out of there. It's so significant that the mapping instruments, all of our Disto X's, were funded by the Mountain Rescue Association grant, because they're interested in having these rescue pre-plans established for their responders as well. Just a few of the many teams. We got teams from Canada, British Columbia, Alberta, Germany, all over the world. You see a lot of mountain rescue teams there, as well as the grottos that have participated in this. So it's just been a kind of a West area, I guess to some extent global grassroots effort to get these projects done. Which is one of the best rewards about it. You just learn a lot from being around other people. So for a lot of folks, these Glacier Cave, people don't really even think about them. And a lot of people just pass right over them or near them without even knowing that they're there or that they're in a hazard zone. This is the Mt Rainier routes, which a lot of you in the program have actually done. And the routes go right over these cave systems. In some places where you can fall right into them and take tumbles for hundreds of feet down into these places. They have no clue that they're even there. So a lot of folks come in proximity, but the opportunity for a rescue situation nonetheless exists. And then you've got people who actually do know about them and target them. And they come here to play, whether it's safe or legal or sane. A lot of folks come out here and do it. I mean, the people jumping over the moulins and snowboards, I have to question their sanity in that. The consequence of failure is rather high. But I suspect we may not even get called when those things happen. But some of these photos, like the one in the tent, that's actually on some tourist sites. They actually offer tours to go in there and camp in these places. And most of them have no clue what they're really getting into. Here's just a 1 minute video also Brent made, just kind of showing a couple little things, and then we'll get into the meat of the program. All right. So for rescuers, which is what we're kind of here to talk about, these are kind of alien environments. Most of us in the program are cavers, but you've got this whole snow and ice thing, the hazmat stuff. And then the fact that these caves move. They're not static environments like most caves are. Most of our limestone caves don't travel to different locations or change rooms from day to day. That does happen here. So it adds a lot of dynamic unpredictables to it. Mountain rescue is usually oriented to surface operations, with crevasses really being what they get into in their mind. It has to having to do with underground, but glacier caves are not crevasses. So crevasses are stress features. Glaciers are like water; they flow. They're subject to plastic deformation, and when they go over the underlying bedrock, with topography they create cracks that make these crevasses. But glacier caves are actually, they're hydrological features. They're either formed by water pouring down from the top and melting their way down, or volcanic steam melting their way up. So they're very different in how they work, and it's allowing you access to the bottom of the glacier where the ice is literally scouring the bedrock clean. So glacier caves are not ice caves. You hear about those two words talked about a lot. Ice caves are rock caves that are formed in limestone, lava, or whatever, that just subsequently form perennial ice masses like you see here. But they're made of rock themselves, whereas glacier caves are actually formed in the ice mass itself. And they're formed by three forces. They're walled in glacier ice, initially formed by water, either liquid water, boring down from the surface, or steam coming up from the underlying bedrock, and then expanded by airflow, which is probably the biggest driver in those things. And then plastic deformation. Ice flows like a river, and it twists these openings and makes them bigger. So you've got those contact caves on the left, where you're at the base of the bedrock and the ice is overhead. Endoglaciers, ice caves or glacier caves that bore right through it, and moulins that go from the surface of the ice all the way down to the bedrock. They're vertical shafts. To make it a little bit more complicated, you've got different. Snow is a variable medium. You've got firn snow, which is compacted snow that's becoming ice, but it's not quite there yet. It won't take an ice screw, and you can barely hammer a snow picket into it. So it's like brutally hard to make anchors there. And then you can see there in the middle photo, the glacier ice below and the firn line above. That's kind of the distinction there, the bright white versus the dirty ice. And then the stratified layers you see on the right side image there. It has a lot of scientific interest because it kind of categorizes climatology as well. Fumarole caves are a subset of glacier they're formed by the geothermal activity of the volcano, which we have tons of those out west. They can be very, very deep because they're forming from underneath, growing up. It can undermine the surface and make these giant tiger trap types of things where people can fall through and just go for long distances without anyone even knowing they're there. And because they're contained environments and they're magmatic gases, you can have a lot of bad air environments, steep topography. You've got these underground tidal waves called yokel loops from floods, from hydrostatic dams. It's all kinds of crazy stuff going on down there that people don't think about. So it adds a lot of dimensions to the cave rescue component. They also change a lot. So this is an example of a new moulin that formed in 2014. That's Dave Clark, former president of MRA, going down one of the first descents there. And you can see how narrow that is. The water is sub-freezing. When it lands on you, it instantly freezes and coats the rope and you with ice. So that becomes a separate challenge. But just a few months later, that's the same hole, how big it is. But that gets covered in snow during the course of the season. And skiers go over that. So you imagine breaking through that, punching through, and then now all of a sudden you've taken a 100-foot fall. You'll probably live through it because there's a lot of avalanche snow at the bottom. But now you're trapped in a subglacial whitewater cave, and probably no one knows you're there. Most skiers don't carry beacons. So the recipe for a rescue situation is pretty big there. As soon as these things became known through the press and whatnot, lots of scientists got involved. Andreas Flitch up there in the upper right-hand corner is one of the lead ones studying airflows. Those are his anemometers in there. But there's a lot of scientists now, not just recreational people and skiers and cavers going into these things, but scientists going in to do their research. Not all of them are aware of the hazards. Andreas is, but some others are not. So again, these are the types of clientele we get into these caves. So not as popular as tag caves, but we do have people traveling into them. So cover a little bit of the hazards and challenges for these types of so that's the first one. Just around the area around the entrances are just really unstable. Remember, this is snow and ice moving. Rock falls and lands on top of the snow at the end of the summer, and then it gets buried by the snow in the winter, and then exhumed later on as it melts. So it's pushing these rocks all around the entrance. So the entrances are really one of the most dangerous places into the cave. In some cases, getting into the cave is the most dangerous part. And once you're in there, it tends to be less so. These big boulders you see, they can be there 1 minute. Next thing you know, there it is laying right where you were planning to walk. So kind of a hazardous situation. Here's another little video showing some of the entrance hazards that we've dealt with in the past. Let's see if we can get that. So thin snow bridges, again, the effects of steam and warm air undermine the entrances. That can make these pretty hazardous, especially when you're approaching them. You'll see at the bottom there, that's Dave Clark anchored in with skis, providing a human anchor for, I think it's Jared with the Volcano Rescue Team, getting close, probing to see how much of the entrance is undercut or not. And on the right side there, that little weird room's called the igloo. That's actually a steam vent that those folks are standing on. And that's what it creates, these like domes underneath the snow. But from the top, you can't tell that's there. You see the little light on the very top right-hand corner. That's all you see when it's lit up at night. But no one would really even know that's there. You'll break through probably 3 or 4 meters before you get to that hole. So again, very interesting. Just more examples of some of these undercut entrances, having to rope up to get around them. So then water flow, a lot of these things are wet. Here's a little video, just being able to communicate with each other, whether it's a patient packaging or a rescue situation or just trying to survey is a challenge in itself. Let me see if this will play at Scotland. So very loud, and most of the ones that have fumaroles in them, you've got the steam, which really occludes your visibility. This is in the summit cave system on Mt Rainier, several miles of intricate passage. This is the main borehole that goes around the inside of it, and it's got lots of complicated You'll see that lead caver there is about to backlight, and there you can see it. But in some cases, you can't see it all, and it also messes up the ability to survey because lasers don't like that stuff.
Eddie, Except for this video that you were just playing, we can't hear you talking while the video is playing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so if you're narrating, we can't hear you.
So for this one, you couldn't hear?
For that one, we could hear, but not true for any of the earlier ones.
Not for the previous ones.
Okay. Wow. Oh, well, it's good to know. I would have no way of knowing. So I'll narrate before then. This is just, again, these caves move. So underneath all these rocks is ice that moves. So it's kind of like a little liquid flow table. These rocks move. And we're here. What you're about to see is us. We're not passing litters, but we're passing parts of a Martian rover through here that weighs 70 to 100 pounds, and a big drone that'll film it ice climbing the walls. And one of the people gets their foot kind of partially crushed by a rock. Here, I'll see if I can find it.
Is everybody in possession? Yeah. All right, let's go with it.
There's your drone. And let me see. Sorry.
Is everybody in possession?
Let's see if we can get to the foot part here.
There you go.
Right on my hand there.
Yeah. I got it. Ooh, you okay?
No, my foot.
Oh, shit. Help lift this
Down the
one.
way, bro. You know what, everyone?
Thank you. How is your foot?
Good.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
It ended up being not so good later, as we found out in the medical tent. And then this is Brent McGregor almost getting clobbered by the same thing. Water flows underneath the rock area. So you got a lot of warm air currents moving through here. What you see in the upper left-hand corner is a thermal camera by Dr. Flitch. And that red spot in the middle of his screen is actually a boulder stuck in the ice. So the air in the cave's, warmer than freezing. It's like 45 degrees, 42, and it heats up the rock, which ends up transmitting that heat into the wall. And so it literally rains boulders at some locations. So you need to be mindful, not just of not standing underneath them, but downhill of where the impact zone would be. And then the pretty ice you see in the floor there, which draws the unaware to it, is oh, let's go touch the pretty ice. That's delamination coming from the ceiling, where warm air gets underneath a crack in the ceiling and drops the whole roof down, and it fractures like glass in the ground. You actually want to stay away from places like that. Remember, these are glaciers. This whole ice pack moves over the bedrock. Cerax are ice towers that are formed by breaking glaciers. They're pretty common in the Himalayas and Europe and all that stuff, but they also are common, unfortunately, underground, especially in Mount St. Helens. So you got to be aware of those things falling. You have to kind of know how ice works in these environments. As in a lot of caves, you're going to get wet. So not a big deal for a lot of cavers, except this water is like 32.1. In some cases, it's sub-freezing. When it hits you, it freezes. So you definitely have to have the proper wear. It could be like 60 degrees, sweating hot on top. And as soon as you're on the ground, you've got ice forming on top of you. So if you're responding to these things, you got to have the proper clothes to do that. Here's a little, I'm going to fast forward to parts of this. Kevin, can you hear me talk over this? So you can? I see your head nodding.
Yeah, I can hear you right now. Yep.
I hear you, Eddie.
All right, cool. Let's see. You see the ice screws there? That's the anchor.
Yeah, I realize that. All right, yeah, you'll have this deal here.
And then this is the first descent into this.
Okay.
Go down, more and more water comes in. I'll try to fast forward.
Starting to get into a little water here. Just a little. Coming up to the water. And there's kind of a figure. There's the drone. And you're back to work.
Again, something to be aware of. You saw this video a little bit earlier, but this is just again, food for thought when you go into these caves. We have things called yucca loops or hydrostatic dams that can break. Water builds up inside the glaciers and forms lakes that can break the dam. You get these tidal waves that come through, sometimes pushing rock fronts in front of it. So you may come in, the stream's relatively benign, but on your way out, you deal with stuff like this. So you have to think about if someone got hurt, how would you get a lift? Surface operations is something to think about. If you're one of the ones, so for every 2 or 3 people on the ground, you're going to probably have 4 or 5 up top with all the radios, ropes, medical gear, and whatnot. And it tends not to be a friendly environment up there. So think about protecting your rescuers up top. If you respond, make sure you've got extra layers, puffies, foam pads to sit on, bothy bags, shelters to preserve yourself and warmth, ways to make heat, because you could be up there a while. So I'm not going to get into avalanches that much, but just understand that the reason the glacier is there is because there's more snow falling than it melts. So it builds up. That's what makes the glaciers flow. And where there's snow, there's avalanche. So that's just the ugly truth of it. Only thing you have to really know about this is you can see a lot of these have avalanches that slide right up to entrances and sometimes actually cover them. This is in Mount St. Helens, where you're actually surrounded by avalanches on both sides. The little red dots there are the big entrances into the cave systems, which go for a long ways, but all those purple lines are the avalanche routes. And you can, unfortunately, they all lead right to where we're at, which is one of the other pre-planning things. You'll see later, we actually run the cave phones, the cricket phones, into the caves deep enough to where if the entrance is buried, you still have comms with the team that's maybe trapped inside. And we always think about adding supplies in there. So same thing for a response. It's something you want to think ahead a lot. Avalanches come down with enough force to flow up and downhill. Both. It's kind of weird. It'd be weird to see ice or snow flowing uphill towards you, but that happens. So you need to carry your avalanche beacons and think about those things. These are things that most cavers don't think about, but it's something you got to definitely consider in glacier caves. Luckily, and this is something we discovered in the course of these studies, that those avalanche beacons work a long, long ways underground and through ice. We've actually found people and can track teams moving under the ice with this. Here's a little bit of an example going into one of the moulins on Mount St. Helens. Consequently, you see the vector edge monopod there, used for a lot of our rigging just to keep the ropes from cutting in. That's the beacon there. It reads in meters, 17, 18, 19 meters. And then, but further away, that person's at the, and even though I'm moving towards the entrance, you see the numbers are getting bigger because they're walking.
She's moving down there.
Almost 50 meters away on the ground. So that's a good thing that we have that ability. So some solutions we've come up with, in terms of rescue pre-planning and just simply doing work safely, or if you have to respond to situations in these areas. One of the biggest ones, simply mapping and doing it every year, because unlike regular rock caves, these change. Whole rooms form or disappear, waterfalls move, different branches change routes. You can't just map it once and think it's done. It's got to be done almost every year. There's John Punches doing some of our surveying on Rainier. He's been a huge help with it. This is the 3D and raw compass footage, and a lot of you do this stuff, of the Mt Rainier caves. About 200, it's not quite 200 meters deep yet, but it's getting there. There's some lakes underneath to deal with. And the end result is this. This is the things we provide to rescue teams. It's a map of the cave, just a bird's eye view or plan view. And then overlaid that are the evacuation routes for different areas. And the closest entrance frequently is not the one you want to use, either because of carbon dioxide poisoning or rock fall hazards. So this becomes a pretty critical rescue pre-planning resource. If there is a rescue up there, these are most likely going to be fly-in missions. It takes days sometimes to get into these places. And unfortunately, the weather does not let helicopters fly all the time. So if you're involved with situations up there or missions, you want to really take the concept of SPAR to heart and maybe think about expanding those parameters into litters and packaging, advanced medical help, because you may not get the help when you need it. This is the other big thing is magmatic gases. Remember, these are active volcanoes. They form with steam coming out. The steam's the most common gas, but there's CO2, hydrogen sulfide, sulfur dioxide, and other unpleasant things coming out of there. So you got to have mitigations for this. I think there'll be a lecture later on that dives deep more into this, but you see where we're using gas monitors, 4 and 5 gas. We carry emergency escape rebreathers. We do have SCBA stuff up there, air purifying respirators. That's standard issue stuff up here. That's an example of the EEBD, or emergency escape breathing device that most of us carry. It's actually a little miniature rebreather. It gives you 30 minutes of air. We've had this, come into play a few times, which is why we got it. We've had some near misses. These were designed for naval ships, for fires deep in a battleship or a submarine to get people up, but they work great for this sort of situation. We're sponsored by SPO, Special Projects Operations, which has the advanced military SCBA stuff. Again, you've got to practice with this stuff. If someone's trapped in there with a CO2 lake or whatnot, just rappelling on rope with these devices, even though they're ultra lightweight, they're still not light. You got to practice crawling and using these things, as well as air purifying respirators. This is one on Mount St. Helens. And as you saw in the previous slide, Katie Graham, Christian said, some of our Canadians, crazy Canadians, actually do surveying in full SCBA with these things. So it's definitely how you have to do business when you're up there. So a little bit about just blending mountain and cave rescue to some of the equipment to carry. Some of it you're familiar with, some maybe not. Obviously, helmet with 3 sources of light. That's a concept that eludes a lot of mountain rescuers. They just think one headlamp because they're not going on the ground. The little laser you see there will actually highlight CO2 lake, planar boundary interfaces in some cases, which is a handy thing to have. Something we discovered up there. Obviously, protective suits so you don't get wet, frozen, and whatnot. There's your escape rebreather, standard issue for stuff people in these areas. The gas monitor. Some have hoses that will read from far away, and others just read right there next to your body. Your avalanche beacon, not the average caver, piece of equipment. Obviously, you don't want your Arc'teryx $400 backpack. It just gets shredded and dumps all your stuff out. So you want the standard caver pack. Mechanical rope ascenders, that's no brainer for cavers, but for mountain rescuers, they love their Prussics, and we try to say, yeah, let's try not to do that. Reflective flagging is to mark way. A lot of this stuff is for mountaineers that don't think about headlamps and whatnot. There's the wire phone kit. You want to wear your harness, even if it's not vertical caving, and an ice screw. You see highlighted in the red circle there, because if one of those floods comes, really your best tack is just to anchor yourself into the wall of the roof and just hope you live through that. If you get washed down range, you are not going to be. So that's kind of a grim thing, but that's why we carry those, just to, in case one of those underground tidal waves comes, you can at least anchor in. Wearing crampons and traction control, even if it looks like dirt. And I know Tom Wood and Scott Lynn, some of the people on this show can attest to this. The climate changes, freezing gusts, reverse flow, and all of a sudden, where it was dirt before, now it's ice, and you can't move. And that's an easy way to break a leg. So you've got to carry traction control at all times because the climate may change. Not going to get into all the phone stuff. That's pretty standard NCRC teaching. But we do standardly deploy phones deep into the cave. So if they get covered up, and this has happened before, where the entrance gets collapsed, you can still communicate with the team while you think of a dig out or an alternate route out of the cave. So something you definitely want to think about. This is a weird one. Glacial ice is under a tremendous amount of compression, sometimes tension, and where you have to get up to high leads. Normally you can ice climb that. And I know Tom Wood is on this call. He's one of the ones that can attest to fractures about the size of a building going off. When you pierce the ice, it sets off these tension detonations that can make huge cracks. So you frequently have to aid climb it with ice screws versus ice axes. Something, again, that was new to me as an ice climber before. Ironically, you want to use short ice screws so you don't pierce too deep and cause those kinds of things to happen. That little thing you see in the lower right-hand corner is a little marker to mark the ice. We had it pushed all the way into that little blue square, and we literally watched it getting pushed back out. The glacier squeezing it enough to where it's creating air pressure and throwing it, it's ejecting it, literally while you watch. It's kind of a cool video, but it takes about 5 minutes to watch. The air in the cave is warmer than the ice, so metal transmits heat like no one's business, so it doesn't take long for ice screws to wallow out. You got to keep a lot of redundancy or someone up there checking on them and replacing them. So especially in a rescue operation, if you're hauling a litter or belaying people down, you've got to really watch those ice screws. There's just an example of fern. That's that terrible stuff you hope you never deal with. So you see in the lower left-hand corner, an example of a route being outlined there. That's to avoid that delamination and roof hazards. So when you walk through, especially with scientists, they're just looking down for their bugs and their specimens and whatnot. We always have somebody assigned to watch for overhead hazards and make sure they don't walk into these places. But if you're one of the ones leading a team in or establishing a staging area, you really want to watch out for those types of things. Ice, unfortunately, makes people want to go there. I'm getting a little bit into what Carrie covered. Hypothermia happens super, super fast, strong airflow. You're on top of ice. It's wet, it's cold. Always carry some kind of shelter with you, not just for yourself, but for your team or a patient. If it happens to have, especially if you have to package somebody in there. An expansion of SPAR for us is, and even for flying up in the helicopter, because every ounce counts. These little helicopters that go up to super high altitude, they're literally counting ounces. So you got to go up with the bare bones minimum. If you have to come up with packaging, this is what we carry. This is the tactical sked. It is rated for horizontal hoist, and with special approval from SCED with the slack liner double webbing type stuff, you can do vertical hauls with it as well. But you see a lot of the same things Carrie covered so well: the vapor barrier, the foam pad. Instead of blankets, we have that Mylar type ultralight heat retention thing there. And then what you see up here is a version of it's not the OSS, it's a miniature vacuum splint called the SPED. It's basically, think of the Oregon spine splint in a vacuum splint version. So it provides both the insulative properties. You can hand mold it to any shape you want. There's the little pump. So it's really, really handy in that regard. And then the same thing, your internal V's and all the internal lashings, external lashings, just the same way Carrie covered in her presentation. But we carry this with us. In some cases that gets staged, and in all cases it gets flown up because it's really lightweight and you can get it up there. So the last little bit is about specialty rope systems. Mountaineers carry thin rope. They love to carry dynamic ropes. When we're teaching rescue response, we again encourage them to go back to static ropes, albeit thin ones, 9 mil, 10 mil. 10 mil is considered fat up there, but it is reflective. This is a PMI rope we use for the low visibility because at least through the steam, your headlamp will make it glow. But we're down to the 8 millimeter ropes in many cases there just because of the weight requirements, but they're still crazy strong. Just a few things here. When you're getting lower down into these entrances for the first time, we use specialty systems for immediate changeovers in case you're getting lowered into a hazardous atmosphere. So you want immediate changeovers, be attached to the rope by way of your climbing system, carrying phones and wires so you can communicate up right away because you will not be able to hear, carrying your gas monitor. You have to think about techniques. Your gas monitors with the hoses, it takes about 1 second per foot of hose for the sample to reach the monitor. So if you're dangling a 20-foot hose, you got to allow for 20 seconds for that sample to get to the monitor. So you need to go slow and make periodic stops to take samples when you're entering a hazardous cave environment like that. Let's see. We already covered this. You don't want to ice climb with screws, so let's just blow through that. Fumarole, this is a big one. So Mount Hood has two big fumaroles that like to eat up mountaineers that fall, especially ones trying to climb it in tennis shoes or microspikes, which is ridiculous. But nonetheless, we've got hundreds of them that don't know what they're doing, especially with COVID. We've got the tennis shoe crowd coming out a lot. So they slip and fall, slide into a hole full of hydrogen sulfide. We got to send a rescuer down there. We want to lower them down with the ability to get them out really quick. So obviously it's very urgent because the recommended daily allowance of hydrogen sulfide is rather small. It's going to be a small team, probably 3 or 4 folks, either flew up or skied up. You're able to get the person out really fast and reverse it. It's one rope. You're only going to have the one rope. You have to be able to build these systems, kind of SPAR style with counterweights and diminishing loops all integrated into one. Grab the patient and go. There's no patient packaging or nothing. It's kind of the burning car analogy. Get them out of the environment that's killing him fast, and then we'll figure out how to package him best to get him back down to meaningful care. Again, not a rope class, just 2 quick images. That's the 3-to-1 diminishing loop there, and your classic counterweight, climbing counterweight with a top position limiter there. The little red dot shows the path of the 3-to-1 diminishing loop. There's the hybrid with the dot there, all built with one rope. There's your position limiter with the red rope, and there it is doing the same function all with the same rope there. So that's an example of hybridizing 2 cave rescue techniques into an Alpine one, and you can see it's got the ATC, which cavers laugh at, but most mountaineers carry nonetheless. I don't like it either, but it is what it is. Just some blowups of that. I'm going to go through them quickly since we're getting low on time. That's what it looks like in real life. There's the top part. That's the return pulley. Here's the rescuer going down. So there's their static line coming in through a little roller, back up to this part with the progress capture, and then back down to their rappel device. So they're only seeing a third of their weight. So 8mm ropes, which would be pretty terrifying on an ATC, becomes a no-brainer with this system. And you've got auto blocks here and up here. So it works really, really well, slick, to get people in and out. That's kind of what it looks like. But what you see here, there's Tom Wood up there running our top station. Ropes cut into the snow really, really hard, unlike rock, where it tends to flow over nice, smooth limestone notches and well-traveled tag caves. It saws its way through about 1 meter deep, which makes this a real bummer when you get up there trying to fit this both through a notch. So edge solutions becomes a huge thing in any type of snow, ice, glacier cave response. You got to think about your edge solution. The easiest one, simply using yourself as a human bipod, like you see in these pictures here. Probably the easiest one. What we're using now most of the time, which flies up every time, is that Vector Edge monopod, 3.5 pounds. It's a brilliant tool. Just lifting up the rope a teeny bit makes all the difference in the world. You split the vector there. You can see it lined up. It loads the monopod and compression. Brilliant solution. And for 3.5 pounds, it's well worth its weight for what it can do. And there's a diagram showing the same situation you saw, just routing through the pulleys at the top there. So it looks a little goofy unless you study it. But there's the Edge Pro. That the static line does not go through pulleys. That's good friction. We want to isolate the anchors there. And just some images showing it again in person. That's Jared Smith with Volcano Rescue. Just going to punch through these guys here. There's the system working again. A little hard to follow, but it's a really simple system. It's a 3-to-1 diminishing loop or expanding loop when he goes down, and he can climb up with the patient, or we can help with counterweight at the top. So it's a really great solution. And that's getting into details. Obviously, you don't want to capsize these things. So that's really it. Just some things to think about. Lots of different dimensions, hopefully that you can maybe apply to your caves or remote areas, but open to any questions you guys may have.
Great. If you can stop screen sharing, Eddie,
sorry.
we'll see folks.
All right, there, good.
So yeah, go ahead. If you have questions, you can raise your hand or write them in the chat and we'll get to those. And yeah, I had the opportunity a few years ago to go with Eddie up Mt Rainier. He didn't even mention like, yeah, you got to climb these mountains to get to these caves unless you get a helicopter ride. But a lot of times he's out there climbing these glaciated mountains to get to them. But it's worth it. The caves are just surreal and really cool. And it's so weird to be in them with the fumes rising from the fumaroles. And then you see all this glacier ice around you and the colors are spectacular. So it's really neat environments, different caving than most of us do. Okay, we've got a question. How do you mitigate the ice forming on the ropes from the water dropping, as you stated?
You don't. You deal with it. So I'd recommend not ATCs. I recommend, a rack or bobbins tend to slough off some of it. But you just got to maintain control. And keep, people moving one after the other. Your ascenders, you have to have good ascenders that have self-cleaning cams so that you can slough that ice off or shake it or whip it against the rope, against the wall when you get back to it. But you can't stop nature from forming ice. So it's just something you sort of got to deal with.
Okay, a question from Kevin, and this might be in relationship to seeing the photo of the pulley with the Prusik. Do the microtraction and duck not work on these ropes?
They do. And we do frequently use microtractions. They work great down. I know for sure 8mm they work fabulous with. There's pros and cons to them. The microtraction, when you have to thumb it to keep it open when someone's going down. And anyone that's using microtraction, they like to go from the pulley mode to the ratchet mode when you don't want it to, especially when it's being drug into snow. They also tend to freeze into position, whereas a Prusik won't do that. Where a Prusik then also can, if you don't keep it off the snow, can self-mind itself. So it depends. If you have a monopod, you can pretty much use anything you want. If it's down, stuck in the snow, boy, you have to really think about what's going to work and what's available. But we do use microtractions quite a bit when possible, but they are subject to freezing and they're very persnickety devices. When they work great, they're fabulous. You just gotta watch them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, this question is from Bill France. Aren't glacier caves too dynamic for anything but a general pre-plan?
For a general pre-plan. Well, the fumaroles themselves that form the caves do not move. They're part of bedrock, so the locations overlying them will remain the same. The general layout of the passages usually remains the same. The different rooms, sizes, configurations, and where waterfalls are located is always changing. So yes, you still want to have your pre-plan. There's some areas that'll, like for staging, we pick places that are not, have never historically been covered with ice, but you have to be adaptive for sure. So it's not as rock solid a pre-plan as you say a cave, a rock or a limestone cave would be, where anything other than the water level probably doesn't change.
Okay. This question is from Frank. Eddie, can you recommend a place to take an AIARE class on or near Mount Hood?
Yeah, I mean, Timberline Mountain Guides teaches them right here in Bend or in Sisters, Central Oregon. Whoever has that question, if you email me, I can send you a list of places that offer the AIARE 1, 2, and 3 courses. But that's not hard to get. There's a lot of anywhere you're near a mountain, a ski resort, or a mountain guide area, you'll be able to get those courses. So email me and I'll get you a list of resources and we'll get you signed up.
So Eddie, I have a question. What's the scariest close call or accident you've had in one of those glacier caves?
Oh, that's easy. That's Mt Rainier. Myself and Dr. Flitch's assistant, Dave Holmgren, it has to do with CO2 lakes. You know, at the time when we first went in, we did not know those really existed, where they did or how they did. And we slit, it's a crater. So all your passages are shaped like this. And it's right there in that the bottom of the trough is where the CO2 settles, sometimes 10, 12, 15 feet deep. And we slid down one of the slopes to go look for a passage because we saw water going down, and the gas alarm pegged out. It stopped at 7% CO2. And then we, bolted out. And Dave Holmgren's a super athlete. So he basically crawled over me, pushed me down to get out. I crawled out kind of in a panic, and I kept going up, and Dave Holmgren passed. He missed the exit and then crawled back over me again. There's something about knowing when you feel that you're gasping for oxygen or hearing the alarm of the gas alarm, it just sends you into this, terrifying mode. And I think you almost hyperventilate as much from self-induced panic from hearing the alarm go off as feeling that impending sense of doom when you start having really low oxygen. So I will never forget that moment. That's probably my single most memorable near miss. And after that, we started carrying the emergency escaper breathers. We wore the lasers on our helmet, so you could actually see the planar boundary. It's like a lightsaber. You can see it very clearly. That helps distinguish those hazards. I want to answer one call. I think someone asked about that, the Furno, or maybe it was Keith or whatever. That's called the SPED, the spinal precaution, I think, evacuation device. It's made by Furno, designed in Europe for race car extrications. It's got an extra large head flap to go around helmets, but hence it's a vacuum splint, and it's become really popular here for snowmobile crashes and extrications, because a lot of times we don't want to remove the snowmobiler's helmet, but it's also hence idealized for cavers, especially Alpine cavers or glacier cavers who have their helmets. We don't want to take them off, and they're wearing a lot of bulky stuff, and it's got that insulative property. So it's called the SPED, S-P-E-D, if you want to look it up.
Yeah, and Andrew put up a link to it. I was wondering, could you tell a little bit more about your experience with it compared with, say, an OSS or one of the other alternatives?
What I like, I love the OSS. I carry that. That's actually my snowmobiling go-to, but the SPED has that insulative benefits of the vacuum splint, which I do love. It's a full-size vacuum splint. It's just, you're not going to see it up here in the Glacier Cave. It's just such a big, bulky thing. But the SPED is packable. You can hand mold it. You can actually, if for whatever reason you want some cervical immobilization, you can simply just hold it and form your own C-collar, or if there's a protrusion or a bone or something, you can pack around it and squeeze it down. So it's just got a lot of versatility. It gets pretty rigid. I'd say about 80 to 85% as rigid as an OSS will. But because it molds around the injury, like a broken leg or whatnot, it's actually probably more versatile. But it's also
what goes around a broken leg. I mean, you're using it as a leg splint then, as opposed to under the back and the neck, right?
Anything. Most of my OSS applications are for like bashed up skiers. I put it on legs, hips, arms, dislocated arms. But in a litter, we'll use it behind the back unless the need for a splint is greater.
If you don't pump it out, does it provide any rigidity and protection like the OSS with the slats?
No, you have to engage. It's just like a vacuum. It's all
it's all vacuum. No slats. Okay.
Yeah, it's just a loosey-goosey thing until you use the vacuum pump and suck the air out of it, and the little pellets contract, just like a regular vacuum splint like you guys use.
Yeah, so you could use that not pumped out just for insulation if you don't need any immobilization, right?
Yeah, you can use it for insulation.
Just use that with do you use it with a shoulder spreader like the OSS?
Yep. So it doesn't come with it because it wasn't designed for cave rescue. So we added the Velcro patch in the back, and we have spare OSS shoulder boards sent from Sked, and we use it. So we have one packaged with it, but it doesn't come set up that way. That's a customization you have to make.
Okay. Did you just use the big 2-inch sticky Velcro on the back of it to connect the?
I used the strongest, hardest Velcro I could find. Whatever David Letterman did to throw himself against the wall, stick to it.
Thanks.
Nice. Okay, we've got time for one more question if anyone has one. Okay, if not, join me again in thanking Eddy for this fantastic presentation. That was very cool to see that otherworldly and caving environment. If you have additional questions, feel free to get in contact with Eddy. Eddy, can you tell everybody what the best way it is to contact you?
Email probably glaciercaveeddy@gmail.com. You know, spelled the way you see my name is spelled there, EDDY, and then the word glacier and cave @gmail.com. And then I can send you a link. There's a longer movie we did for the MRA anniversary 2 years ago. It's about 18 minutes, also made by Brent McGregor. Phenomenal. It shows a lot more stuff. So if you're interested in that, I can send you a link. It's just set to music, but it was too long to get into tonight. But yeah, Gretchen can find me. If you have a question, get her, hold of her. She'll get me.
Great. Well, thank you again, everyone, for joining us tonight. And thanks again to Carrie and Eddy for their marvelous presentations. Please join us on April 14th for our next part of the series. And until then, cave safely, think safely, be safe, and we'll see you.